One of the reasons why the Roman Empire speaks so to the imagination is because of the sheer size of the empire. At its peak, it stretched from Scotland in the north to Morocco in the south, and from Portugal in the west to Iran in the east. It is estimated that at its peak, about 20 to 25% of the entire world population was governed by Roman rule. And more so than now, these people were very diverse. Reason for us to take a closer look at the inhabitants of the Roman Empire and their relation with the Roman Empire. And what better place to start than with our own country, nowadays the Netherlands.
For many centuries, Rome had not dared to venture past the Alps to the north of Italy. Only with Julius Caesar, halfway through the 1st century BC, did they finally do so, and in a convincing manner at that. In a decade of continuous war, Julius Caesar had submitted all Gallic tribes, all the way up to the river Rhine in the Netherlands. These Gallic wars amounted to nothing less than genocide, and one of the most diligent annihilations was that of the tribe of the Eburones. These people lived south of the river Rhine in what is now the southern Netherlands and Belgium, and they were responsible for starting a revolt against the Romans in 54 BC. To set an example, Caesar went the extra mile to wipe this tribe off the face of the earth for once and for all, even inviting neighboring tribes to join in and help locate and kill whomever had managed to escape the Roman onslaught. The next decades in the history of the Low Countries are relatively uneventful, or at least vague, as Rome was fully occupied with the immense civil war that followed after the assassination of Julius Caesar. In the end, his adopted grandnephew Octavian came out as victorious and was unofficially crowned as the first emperor, receiving the honorary title of Augustus. Right after attaining his undeniable position of absolute ruler over the Roman Republic, Augustus embarked on a campaign to Gaul, though not a military campaign this time, but rather a campaign to structurally consolidate and stabilize the lands conquered by Caesar. Part of his approach was the settling of allied tribes along the Roman frontier, as to form a buffer zone against enemy invasions. To the northeast of central Gaul, the Romans came into contact with a group of Chatti, a large Germanic tribe that lived in the western part of current-day Germany, and who, according to Tacitus, could compare to the Roman military in battle tactics and discipline. An internal conflict caused the group to split off and leave, in search for new lands. This group came into contact with the Romans, maybe even met Augustus personally, who offered them lands in what is now the Netherlands. With the other option being turning back and having to look for other unoccupied lands outside of the Roman Empire, the Chatti separatists would have gratefully accepted, realizing they owed the Romans greatly. At the same time, they helped out the Romans, as their occupation of the central Netherlands filled a major gap in the Roman border, left behind by the destruction of the Eburones by Caesar. Now it was manned by a befriended people of extraordinary warriors, with the sense of debt to the Romans on top of that. The immigrant Chatti mixed in with the few locals that were already living there, and from this moment onwards the name Chatti disappears from the sources, and instead a new name for this community comes up: Batavians. These lands were crossed by many streams and rivers, many of which would overflow on a yearly basis, flooding the surrounding lower lands. Generally speaking, the land of the Batavians was therefore better suited for animal husbandry than for large-scale farming, with farming being limited to the higher grounds. The animals kept were mostly sheep and cows, with occasional horse, pig and, with the arrival of the Romans, chicken. Crafts, industries and trade were of minor importance as a ways of income to them. They were primarily farmers, and as such they lived in byre houses or farmsteads, houses with a separate compartment for the animals to live under the same roof, as was common at the time. These houses were often grouped together to form a small community of a couple of families, often no more than 4. There were an estimated 1,500 of these small agricultural settlements in the area of the Batavians, making for an estimated population of around 25,000 people. Next to all these small farming communities, there were the Romans. The Romans had arrived just some years after the Germanic settlers. They first set up base at the location of the current-day city of Nijmegen, as a starting point for operations across the Rhine. In due time, they built forts and watchtowers along the river Rhine, but by far their most dominant presence would become the site at Nijmegen, where in time a cavalry base and a legionary fort would be built. These camps would accommodate many thousands of soldiers at any one time. So it came as no surprise when the Romans officially annexed the Batavian territory in 12 BC. No blood was spilled, not only because resistance to the might of the Roman army was futile to begin with, but even more so, the Batavians must have known they were in debt to the Romans for allowing them to settle there in the first place, and this was part of the deal. Tacitus confirms such a thing when he says,
"They were once a section of Chatti, and on the occasion of a civil war they migrated to their present home, destined there to become a part of the Roman Empire."
Shortly after the official incorporation of their lands into the Roman Empire, the Romans founded a town next to the legionary camp at the current-day city of Nijmegen. They laid out a typical Roman straight street plan and let soldiers, veterans and their respective families settle there. This settlement was most likely named Oppidum Batavorum, meaning fortified settlement of the Batavians. It was meant to attract Batavians to come and live there, and in time to make this town their administrative center. That way the Romans would have a central point they could turn to for all matters concerning the Batavians, instead of having to deal with all these scattered settlements. At the same time, making the Batavians live the Roman city life would integrate the Batavians further into the Roman culture, making for a stronger bond between the two. This was part of a conscious policy by Emperor Augustus: pacification by integration.
Archaeological evidence shows us that the city did grow and prosper in the 1st century, though it was mostly inhabited by veterans, soldiers' families and even Gallic immigrants. Few clues of actual Batavians living there have been found, suggesting that the attraction of city life was lost on Batavians. This may be because inherently cities attract craftsmen and merchants, but, as we discussed earlier, the Batavians were no craftsmen and merchants. Batavians were predominantly farmers. The Batavians surely would have capitalized upon the economic opportunities the city presented, and the nobility would have made sure to strengthen the ties with the Romans. But all the while, they stayed mostly put in the countryside. That didn't mean, though, there was no cultural exchange.
To the contrary, there are many clues the Batavians were heavily influenced by and adapted to the Roman lifestyle. The many archaeological finds of Roman items in the rural settlements of the Batavians prove this, as well as the adoption of Roman pottery techniques and the spread of Roman-style houses with roofed porches. Not to mention the 3 massive monumental Roman temples in the Batavian lands. Especially the one found a little north of Nijmegen was particularly impressive, one of the biggest temples found north of the Alps. It must have been sponsored by a very, very rich man, almost certainly an emperor. Telling is also that this temple was not located in the Roman city of Nijmegen, but near a small village in the countryside, and these temples were dedicated to the Roman gods, or at least a Germanic bastardization of them. Clearly the lands of the Batavians were no longer barbaric no man's land, but, in time, had become a true part of the Roman Empire. The most significant reason for the relatively quick integration of the Batavian people into Roman society was the Roman army, specifically Batavians serving in the Roman army. During their service, the Batavian soldiers lived in Roman-style barracks, learned to speak Latin to some degree, picked up on Roman religious beliefs and adapted to Roman morals and culture in general. Coming home a wealthy Roman citizen after 25 years of service, the majority of their life, they must have felt as much Roman as they did Batavian. Their presence and their network of Roman and veteran connections must have helped integrate Batavian communities into the larger Roman world greatly. So service in the Roman military played a major role in the Romanization of the Batavian tribe, and just that became the hallmark of Batavian society. Like all other subordinates to the Roman Empire, the Batavians were to pay taxes, but their taxes were of a different kind. In his account of the Germanic peoples, Tacitus says,
"Of these peoples, the bravest are the Batavians. They still retain an honorable privilege in token of their ancient alliance with us. They're not subjected to the indignity of tribute or ground down by the tax gatherer, are free from imposts and special levies, and reserved for employment in battle, they are like weapons and armor, only to be used in war.
So the Batavians were exempt from regular taxes and instead were only reserved for employment in battle. In practice, this meant they were to provide troops for the Roman army, and not just in times of need, like Tacitus makes it seem. Why they received this special treatment is not exactly clear. Tacitus refers to their extraordinary bravery and their ancient alliance to Rome, as though this was more suited to their lifestyle and a gesture out of friendship. But the real reason might well have been the fact that the Batavians were poor immigrants with a basic economy and didn't have much to pay taxes with. So not so much of a privilege as an alternative way of taxation. Either way, the Batavians were to become one of the main sources of manpower for the Roman army, providing no less than 8 cohorts of infantry, 1 unit of cavalry, and, for a large part, the emperor's cavalry bodyguard, a total of some 5,000 men. Though, because such a large number of troops could not realistically been provided by just the Batavian tribe, it is safe to assume these Batavian units also included men from neighboring smaller tribes. And although enlistment in the army had plenty of advantages for the men serving, a steady income and Roman citizenship amongst others, the burden would be hard felt by the Batavian society left behind. It is estimated that on average every Batavian family had 1 son serving in the Roman army, but we even know of multiple instances of Batavian brothers serving together. Young men in their 20s and 30s would be severely underrepresented in Batavian society, leaving most of the tough daily farm work to be done by women, children, and older men. This didn't just have emotional and physical implications for those families, but also must have damaged the all-round development of the Batavian community. Nevertheless, the relationship between the Romans and the Batavians was one of peaceful coexistence, until 69 AD. In 69 AD, the burden of recruitment had finally reached a breaking point for the Batavians, so much so that another round of conscription amongst the Batavians gave rise to a revolt, known as the Batavian Revolt. In the revolt, multiple Roman towns and forts got destroyed, amongst which the aforementioned Oppidum Batavorum. The town would be rebuilt shortly after reinstalling peace, this time a mile further downstream. The town was designed following a typical Roman checkerboard pattern and had a bathhouse and an aqueduct. The town thrived and received official recognition as the regional capital by the granting of city rights by the hand of Emperor Trajan in the beginning of the 2nd century. It became one of the major cities of the north, numbering approximately 5,000 inhabitants, the most for any city in the Netherlands until medieval times. As to the Batavian units that had rebelled, they got relocated to different regions away from home, as a way to diminish the chance of another revolt. They would be stationed mostly in Britain and in Eastern Europe along the Danube border, gaining fame for their bravery and their ability to swim rivers with their horses while in full gear. They would also continue to serve in the emperor's horse bodyguard, leaving behind many gravestones in Rome, proudly mentioning their Batavian descent.
Within a century after settling in the wet riverlands of the central Netherlands, the Chatti separatists had formed their own identity as Batavians. From the start, their society had been intertwined with Rome, which was reflected in their material culture and economy, in their religious beliefs, in their housing architecture, but most of all in their career paths. For centuries, the Batavian units would serve loyally alongside the legions, and in that way, Batavian society had become an integral part of the Roman Empire.
This video was brought to you by Erve Eme, an archeological park in Zupthen The Netherlands. They helped us out a lot, so if you're in the neighborhood, make sure you pay them a visit. More information is in the link below.